Lisa used my credit, stole my boyfriend, and lived my life better than I did. Now she's facing fraud charges while I'm sitting on $1 million inheritance. The first time I noticed something was wrong, I was standing in the cereal aisle at the grocery store, holding a box of cornflakes and staring at my declined debit card like it had personally betrayed me. The cashier was giving me that look, you know, the one, somewhere between pity and annoyance, while a line of people behind me started shifting their weight and checking their phones. I had been living paycheck to paycheck since graduating college 2 years earlier, but I was careful with my money. I knew exactly how much was in my account down to the last dollar. There should have been enough for groceries and gas for the week. The embarrassment burned hot in my cheeks as I mumbled an apology and left my cart right there in the middle of the store. When I got home to my tiny studio apartment, I immediately logged into my banking app. What I saw made my stomach drop to the floor. My checking account was overdrawn by $3,000. There were charges I had never made, expensive dinners at restaurants I couldn't afford, designer clothing purchases, even a payment to some fancy spa downtown. But the really strange part was that all the charges had been made using my debit card, with transactions showing they required a PIN. I spent the next 3 hours on the phone with my bank, going through each fraudulent charge one by one. The customer service representative was patient but clearly skeptical. When I insisted I had never been to these places or made these purchases, she kept asking if maybe I had forgotten or if someone close to me might have access to my card and PIN. The implication stung. She was basically asking if I was lying or just incredibly irresponsible. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept running through possibilities in my mind. Who could have gotten hold of my information? I was always careful with my cards, never wrote my PIN down anywhere, always covered the keypad when entering it. The only person who might have seen me enter it was Lisa, my cousin who had been staying with me on and off for the past few months while she looked for work. Lisa had always been the golden child in our family. She was beautiful, charming, and seemed to effortlessly succeed at everything she tried. Growing up, family gatherings always revolved around her latest achievements while I felt like background noise. Even our grandmother, who I was closest to, would light up differently when Lisa walked into the room. There was something about Lisa that drew people in, made them want to give her things, help her out, make her life easier. When she had shown up at my door 6 months earlier, crying about losing her job and having nowhere to go, I didn't hesitate to let her crash on my couch. She promised it would just be temporary, just until she got back on her feet. I was actually excited to have her around. Maybe this would be our chance to finally build a real relationship as adults. But living with Lisa was like having a beautiful tornado tear through your life. She would use my shampoo, wear my clothes, eat my food, and somehow make it all look better than when I did those same things. She had this way of making my small apartment feel even smaller just by being in it. Guys I had been casually seeing would suddenly lose interest after meeting her. My coworkers started asking why I never brought my fun cousin around anymore after she had stopped by my office a few times. The morning after discovering the fraudulent charges, I confronted Lisa as gently as I could. I explained what had happened and asked if she might have accidentally used my card instead of hers. She looked genuinely shocked and hurt that I would even suggest such a thing. She reminded me of all the times she had helped around the apartment, all the groceries she had bought for both of us, all the ways she had tried to contribute despite her difficult situation. I felt terrible for even bringing it up. Lisa had this way of making you feel like you were the unreasonable one, like you were being paranoid or cruel for questioning her. She cried a little and talked about how hard it had been to lose her job, how embarrassed she was to have to rely on family, how she was doing everything she could to get back on her feet. By the end of the conversation, I was apologizing to her and promising to figure out how someone else could have gotten my information. Over the next few weeks, more strange things started happening. I received credit card statements for accounts I had never opened, bills for services I had never signed up for, a notice that I had been approved for a student loan for a graduate program I had never applied to. Each time I called to dispute these things, the customer service representatives would ask me to verify personal information, my social security number, my mother's maiden name, my address, and everything would match perfectly. The most confusing part was that Lisa seemed just as bewildered by all of this as I was. She would sit with me while I made phone calls to sort out the latest financial disaster, offering support and suggesting different approaches. She even helped me file a police report for identity theft, sitting right there in the station while I explained everything to the officer. Meanwhile, my relationship with my college boyfriend was falling apart. We had been together for 3 years, and while we weren't living together yet, we had started talking seriously about our future. But lately, he seemed distant and distracted. When I tried to talk to him about it, he would get defensive and accuse me of being clingy or paranoid. The breaking point came when I found out he had been having long phone conversations with someone he claimed was just a friend from an online forum. He would step out of the room to take these calls, and when I asked about them, he would get irritated and tell me I was being controlling. The worst part was how he would smile during these conversations, a soft, private smile that I realized he hadn't given me in months. One evening, I decided to surprise him at his apartment with dinner from his favorite restaurant. I had been working extra hours to make up for all the financial chaos in my life, and we hadn't spent much quality time together lately. When I knocked on his door, it took him a long time to answer, and when he finally did, he looked flustered and guilty. He claimed he had been taking a shower, but his hair was dry and he was fully dressed. I could hear his phone buzzing from somewhere in the apartment, and he kept glancing toward the sound with an expression I couldn't quite read. We ate dinner mostly in silence, and he seemed eager for me to leave. That night, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was seriously wrong. Not just with my finances, but with my entire life. It felt like everything I thought I could count on was shifting beneath my feet, and I couldn't figure out why. The next morning, I made a decision that would change everything. I hired a private investigator. I know it sounds dramatic, but I was desperate. The police weren't taking my identity theft case seriously. They kept suggesting that maybe I had just forgotten about the charges or that someone in my household was responsible. My bank was treating me like I was either lying or incompetent. My boyfriend was acting like a stranger. I needed answers, and I needed someone who would actually listen to me and take me seriously. The investigator I hired was a middle-aged woman who had spent 20 years working cases involving financial fraud. She was straightforward and no-nonsense, but she believed me from the start. She explained that identity theft cases like mine were more common than people realized, and that the perpetrator was usually someone close to the victim. What she discovered over the next 2 weeks was worse than I could have imagined. Update 1. The investigator's report landed on my kitchen table like a bomb going off in slow motion. As I read through the pages, my hands started shaking so badly I could barely hold the papers. Lisa hadn't just stolen my credit card information. She had systematically taken over my entire identity. Using my social security number and personal information, she had opened 17 different credit accounts in my name. She had enrolled in graduate school under my identity and had been attending classes for an entire semester. She had even gotten a driver's license in my name with her photo on it. But the most devastating discovery was what she had done with my relationship. The investigator had traced the online conversations my boyfriend had been having. They weren't with a random friend from a forum. They were with Lisa, who had been using my name and photos to create fake social media profiles. For months, she had been having intimate conversations with him, pretending to be me. She had been telling him things about our relationship, about our future plans, about her feelings for him, all while using my identity. The phone records showed hundreds of hours of calls between them. Text message logs revealed detailed conversations about their plans to meet in person. She had convinced him that I was being distant and cold in real life because I was going through some kind of personal crisis, but that online I could be my real self with him. Reading through their conversations was like watching someone else live my life, but better. The version of me that Lisa had created was funnier, more adventurous, more emotionally available. She had told him about dreams and goals that sounded like mine, but more polished, more achievable. She had shared memories that were twisted versions of my actual experiences, but somehow more interesting in her telling. The worst part was seeing how completely he had fallen for this fake version of me. His messages to her were full of love and excitement and plans for the future. He was talking to her the way he used to talk to me in the early days of our relationship, before things got complicated and routine and real. When I confronted him with the evidence, he initially didn't believe me. He insisted that the person he had been talking to was clearly me. She knew things only I would know. She had the same sense of humor. She understood him in ways that felt authentic and real. When I showed him the fake social media profiles Lisa had created using my photos, he stared at them for a long time without saying anything. The moment he finally understood what had happened was heartbreaking to watch. The color drained from his face, and he sat down heavily in his chair like someone had punched him in the stomach. He kept saying he couldn't believe it, that it didn't make sense, that the person he had been talking to couldn't have been fake because the connection had felt so real. But then he said something that cut deeper than anything else. He admitted that he had been planning to break up with me because he had fallen in love with the person he thought was the online version of me. He said she was everything he had hoped I could be, and that being with the real me had started to feel disappointing in comparison. That night, after he left my apartment for the last time, I sat on my couch and tried to make sense of what my life had become. My cousin had stolen my identity so thoroughly that she had even stolen my relationship by becoming a better version of me than I was. The financial damage was devastating. I owed tens of thousands of dollars on accounts I had never opened, my credit score was destroyed, and I was facing potential legal consequences for debts I couldn't pay. But somehow, the emotional damage felt worse. Lisa hadn't just taken my money or my boyfriend. She had taken my sense of self. She had proven that with enough effort and deception, she could be me better than I could be me. The next few weeks were a blur of legal consultations, police reports, and paperwork. The detective assigned to my case finally started taking things seriously once he saw the extent of the fraud. Lisa had been living in my apartment, using my identity and destroying my life while I watched it happen and even felt sorry for her. When they arrested her, she was at the graduate school she had been attending under my name, sitting in a seminar about psychology and human behavior. The irony wasn't lost on me. She didn't go quietly. According to the police report, she maintained her innocence and claimed that there had been some kind of misunderstanding. She insisted that she had never meant to hurt me, that everything had gotten out of control, that she had been trying to help me by managing some of my financial obligations. But the evidence was overwhelming. Bank records, phone logs, witness statements from classmates who knew her as me, surveillance footage of her using my credit cards. There was no explaining away what she had done. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for 2 months later, which gave me time to start trying to rebuild my life. I had to file disputes for every fraudulent account, work with creditors to prove I wasn't responsible for the debts, and begin the long process of restoring my credit. I had to notify the school that someone had been impersonating me and withdraw from the program I had never enrolled in. Most importantly, I had to figure out who I was when I wasn't being overshadowed by Lisa's version of me. It was during this time that I got the call that would change everything again. My grandmother had passed away. Update 2. The funeral was small and quiet, just immediate family gathered in the cemetery on a gray October morning. I stood there listening to the pastor talk about Grandma's long life and generous spirit, but I couldn't focus on his words. All I could think about was how Grandma had been the one constant source of unconditional love in my life, and now she was gone. Lisa wasn't there, obviously. She was still in jail awaiting trial, and even if she hadn't been, I wasn't sure anyone in the family would have been comfortable with her presence. The whole extended family knew what had happened by now, and the shame and embarrassment seemed to hover over everyone like a dark cloud. After the service, Grandma's attorney asked me to stay behind. He was an elderly man who had been handling Grandma's affairs for decades, and he had a kind but serious expression as he handed me a sealed envelope. Inside was a letter in Grandma's familiar handwriting, dated just 3 months before her death. The letter started with the usual grandmotherly expressions of love and pride, but then it took an unexpected turn. Grandma wrote that she had always known there were secrets in our family, secrets that went back to before I was born. She had decided that it was time for the truth to come out and that I deserved to know everything. What she told me in that letter turned my entire understanding of my life upside down. Lisa wasn't my cousin. She was my twin sister. Grandma explained that my mother had given birth to twins, but the family wasn't prepared to handle 2 babies. Money was tight, my father had just lost his job, and my mother was struggling with what would later be recognized as severe postpartum depression. The decision was made to put 1 baby up for adoption, and Lisa had been placed with a family across the state. The adoption was supposed to be closed with no contact between the families. But apparently Lisa's adoptive parents had struggled with addiction and financial problems throughout her childhood. She had spent time in foster care, bounced between relatives, and had generally had a much more difficult life than I had experienced. Grandma wrote that she had always felt guilty about this decision and that she had tried to make it up to Lisa by being extra loving and generous whenever she came around. She had helped pay for Lisa's expenses over the years, had given her money when she needed it, and had always made sure she felt welcome in the family. But Grandma had also been watching, and she had noticed things that worried her. Lisa's resentment toward me. Her jealousy. The way she would make subtle comments about how unfair it was that I had gotten the better life while she had struggled. Grandma had begun to suspect that Lisa's recent troubles might not be entirely accidental. The letter ended with the information that Grandma had left me her entire estate, her house, her savings, her investments, everything. The total value was over $1 million. But she had specifically excluded Lisa from the will, not out of cruelty, but because she was afraid that Lisa's resentment had grown into something dangerous. Grandma had been right. Sitting in the attorney's office, holding this letter, I finally understood everything. Lisa hadn't just stolen my identity on impulse or out of desperation. She had been systematically trying to take over my life because she believed it should have been hers from the beginning. The attorney explained that the will was ironclad. Grandma had been very specific about her wishes, and she had updated the document recently to make sure there would be no confusion. Lisa had no legal claim to any part of the inheritance. But there was one more surprise waiting for me. The attorney handed me another envelope, this one addressed to both me and Lisa. It was a letter Grandma had written specifically for us to read together, explaining our history and her hopes that we might eventually find a way to be sisters despite everything that had happened. She had always planned to tell us the truth before she died, but her health had declined faster than expected. The letter was her way of making sure we both knew where we came from and why our lives had taken such different paths. Reading Grandma's explanation of our early years, I could almost understand Lisa's anger. She had grown up knowing she was adopted but not knowing she had a twin sister living just a few hours away, enjoying the stable family life that could have been hers. When she finally discovered the truth and found me, it must have felt like looking at the life that had been stolen from her. But understanding her motivation didn't excuse what she had done. She had chosen to respond to this unfairness by trying to destroy my life rather than by trying to build a relationship with me. She had turned her pain into a weapon and used it to hurt the one person who might have understood what she was going through. The next few months passed in a strange blur of legal proceedings and life changes. Lisa's trial moved forward and the evidence against her was overwhelming. She was facing serious charges for identity theft, fraud, and financial crimes. Her attorney tried to negotiate a plea deal, but the prosecutor wasn't interested in being lenient given the scope and duration of her crimes. Meanwhile, I was learning how to manage the inheritance Grandma had left me. The house needed work, the investments required attention, and there were tax implications I had never dealt with before. It was overwhelming, but it was also liberating. For the first time in my adult life, I didn't have to worry about money. I could focus on rebuilding my credit, my relationships, and my sense of self. The call came on a Tuesday evening in February. Lisa was calling from jail, and she was crying. The prosecutor had rejected her latest plea offer, and it looked like she was going to trial. Her attorney was asking for a significant retainer to continue representing her, money she didn't have. Her adoptive parents couldn't help, they were dealing with their own financial problems. She was facing the possibility of representing herself in a complex fraud case, which would almost certainly result in a lengthy prison sentence. She was calling to ask if I would help pay for her legal fees. The conversation was surreal. Here was the person who had systematically destroyed my life, asking me to use the inheritance she had been excluded from to help her avoid the consequences of her actions. She was crying and apologizing, saying she understood why I might not want to help her, but begging me to remember that we were sisters. She told me that discovering she was my twin had driven her a little crazy. She said she had spent years wondering why her life had been so hard while other people seemed to have everything handed to them. When she found out that I was literally the other half of her, the sister who had gotten the family and stability and opportunities that she had been denied, it felt like confirmation of everything she had suspected about the unfairness of the world. She claimed that she had initially just wanted to understand my life better, to see what it felt like to be me. But once she started using my identity, it became addictive. Being me was easier than being herself. My life was simpler, my relationships were healthier, my opportunities were better. She said she had convinced herself that she wasn't really hurting me, that she was just borrowing my life temporarily while she figured out her own. But then she had fallen in love with my boyfriend through their online conversations and everything had spiraled out of control. She had started to believe that the life she was living as me was the life she was supposed to have. She had convinced herself that some cosmic mistake had been made at birth and she was just correcting it. Listening to her explanation, I felt a complicated mix of emotions. Anger at what she had done to me. Sadness for the pain she had experienced growing up. Confusion about what, if anything, I owed her as her sister. And underneath it all, a strange kind of recognition because I could imagine how devastating it would be to discover that your twin sister had gotten everything you had been denied. But I also knew that understanding her pain didn't make her actions acceptable. She had had choices at every step of the way. When she discovered I was her sister, she could have reached out to me honestly. When she started having financial problems, she could have asked for help instead of stealing from me. When she developed feelings for my boyfriend, she could have stepped back instead of pursuing a relationship built on deception. She had chosen destruction over connection, theft over honesty, manipulation over vulnerability. And now she was asking me to save her from the consequences of those choices. Final update. I didn't give Lisa the money for her legal fees. It was one of the hardest decisions I've ever made, but I knew it was the right one. After everything she had put me through, after all the lies and manipulation and destruction, I couldn't reward her behavior by rescuing her from its consequences. Instead, I did something that surprised both of us. I wrote her a letter. In it, I acknowledged that we were sisters and that her childhood had been unfair in ways that mine hadn't been. I told her that I understood her anger and her pain and that I wished things had been different for both of us. But I also explained that her response to that unfairness had been to try to destroy the one person who might have understood her, who might have been able to help her heal. I told her that I forgave her, not because what she had done was acceptable, but because carrying anger toward her was only hurting me. I explained that forgiveness didn't mean there wouldn't be consequences and that I couldn't enable her destructive behavior by solving her problems for her. But I also made her an offer. When she got out of prison and she would eventually get out, I would be willing to work on building a real relationship with her. Not based on deception or competition or trying to steal each other's lives, but based on honesty about who we really were and what we both needed to heal. I told her that Grandma had left her something after all, even though it wasn't money or property. She had left her a sister who knew what it felt like to grow up feeling like something was missing, who understood the particular loneliness of being an only child in a family full of secrets. Lisa's trial lasted 3 weeks. I attended some of the proceedings, sitting in the back of the courtroom and watching her face as witness after witness testified about the extent of her fraud. She was convicted on multiple counts and sentenced to 4 years in prison, followed by probation and restitution requirements. The day after her sentencing, I received a letter from her. It was different from any communication we had ever had before, no manipulation, no excuses, no attempts to make me feel sorry for her. Just a simple acknowledgement that she understood why I had made the decision I had made, and a promise that she would use her time in prison to figure out how to be the person she actually was instead of trying to be someone else. That was 8 months ago. We exchange letters now, maybe once a month. They're awkward and careful, like we're both learning a new language. But they're honest in a way that our conversations never were before. She tells me about the classes she's taking in prison, about the counseling sessions she's required to attend, about the slow work of figuring out who she is when she's not consumed with resentment about who she isn't. I tell her about fixing up Grandma's house, about starting a small business with part of the inheritance, about learning to trust people again after what she put me through. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if Grandma had told us the truth earlier, if we had grown up knowing we were sisters instead of cousins. Maybe Lisa's life would have been different. Maybe we could have supported each other through the difficulties instead of her seeing me as a symbol of everything she had been denied. But I've learned that you can't live in the world of what-ifs. You can only work with what actually happened and try to make something better going forward. The inheritance has given me opportunities one never expected to have. I've been able to pay off all the debts Lisa created, rebuild my credit, and start over financially. But more than that, it's given me the freedom to figure out who I am when I'm not constantly worried about money or trying to clean up someone else's mess. I've been dating someone new, a relationship that started slowly and carefully because trust doesn't come easily anymore. He knows the whole story about Lisa and the identity theft, and he's patient with my occasional paranoia about people having ulterior motives. It's different from my relationship with my ex-boyfriend, more mature, more honest, built on actually knowing each other rather than on idealized versions of ourselves. My ex has reached out a few times wanting to talk about what happened and apologize for his part in everything. I understand why he fell for Lisa's deception. She had created a version of me that was designed to be irresistible to him specifically. But I also know that we can't go back to what we had before. Too much has happened and we're both different people now. The strangest part of this whole experience has been learning to live without the constant comparison to Lisa that had defined so much of my life. Growing up, I had always felt like I was competing with her for attention, approval, and love from our family. Even when I didn't understand why, I felt like I was losing that competition. Now I know that the competition was never fair to begin with. She was fighting for a place in a family that should have been hers from birth, while I was trying to hold onto a position I had gotten by chance. Neither of us understood the rules of the game we were playing because no one had told us what the game actually was. But understanding the unfairness doesn't make me want to give up what I have. The inheritance, the opportunities, the stability, these are mine now, and I've learned that I don't have to feel guilty about having them. I didn't choose to be the twin who got kept any more than Lisa chose to be the one who got given away. But I can choose what to do with the advantages I've been given. I've used some of the money to set up a scholarship fund at the local community college, specifically for students who have aged out of the foster care system. It's a small thing, but it feels like a way to honor both the privileges I've had and the struggles Lisa went through. Maybe it will help someone else who grew up feeling like they were starting life with disadvantages they didn't choose. Lisa has 2.5 years left on her sentence. Her letters suggest that she's making real progress in understanding why she made the choices she did and how to make different ones going forward. She's been participating in a program that helps inmates develop job skills and plan for re-entry into society. I don't know what our relationship will look like when she gets out. Maybe we'll be able to build something real together, or maybe the damage is too extensive to repair. But I'm open to finding out. She's the only sister I'll ever have, and despite everything she did, I can't shake the feeling that we're meant to be in each other's lives somehow. The house I inherited from Grandma sits on 3 acres just outside town with a big front porch and rooms that echo when you walk through them alone. Sometimes I stand in the kitchen where Grandma used to make Sunday dinner for the whole family, and I imagine what it would have been like if Lisa had been there too, if we had grown up as sisters instead of as rivals competing for scraps of attention. But then I remember that imagination and reality are different things, and that you can't build a future on fantasies about how the past should have been different. You can only work with what actually is and try to make it into something better than what came before. I'm learning to be myself without constantly measuring that self against someone else's version of what I could be. It's harder than it sounds after spending so many years feeling like I was coming up short in comparisons I didn't even understand. But it's also liberating in ways I couldn't have anticipated. The identity theft case is officially closed now, all the legal proceedings finished, all the paperwork filed away. But the real work of rebuilding my sense of who I am continues every day. Some days I feel strong and confident and grateful for the second chance I've been given. Other days I feel overwhelmed by the weight of everything that happened and uncertain about how to move forward. But I keep Lisa's latest letter on my kitchen table next to the letter Grandma wrote us both. In it, Lisa wrote something that I think about often: I spent so many years trying to be you that I forgot how to be me. Now I'm learning that being me is harder but also more honest. I hope someday we can both just be ourselves and see if that's enough to build something real together. I hope so too. Because despite everything that happened, despite all the pain and betrayal and destruction, there's still a part of me that believes in the possibility of family. Not the family you're born into, but the family you choose to build with honesty and forgiveness and the hard work of loving people even when they disappoint you. Maybe that's naive. Maybe some things are too broken to fix. But maybe not. Maybe sometimes the worst thing that happens to you becomes the beginning of something better than what you had before. I guess I'll find out in 2.5 years.